Hello. We're here to talk about why Lightning is not private. It's as the Bcashers would say, doomed to failure. It's never going to work. All that. So welcome, Evan Kaludis from Zeus Lightning, Anthony Routing from Impervious, Nifty Knife from Blockstream, and yeah. In all seriousness, Lightning is kind of pitched as a magic privacy solution. You hop on Lightning, you spend your money over Lightning, and there's nothing to worry about. Like, no information leaking. It fixed the privacy issue. And the technical reality of that is not quite. So I guess to start, the whole issue between sending and receiving there. I guess wild card, anybody want to talk about the issues in terms of when you receive money, all of the information that just leaks out into the world that a lot of users might not be aware of?
Yeah, I think to start off, senders have amazing privacy on Lightning from a general level. There's some trade-offs there, and you can get into the weeds on that. But when you're sending payments, you can you have like onion routing messages going across the network. So you don't really know where it actually came from. You don't even know if the previous hop that a Lightning payment is going through is actually who it is. But like you said, like receivers on the other hand, it's a little bit of a different story. You have to give information out to another person in order to get paid, to actually receive money. So some of that information that's leaked is alias names, IP addresses. If you have any unannounced channels, you may leak those as well in order to get paid down those channels. So there's a lot of areas where receivers need to be a little bit careful, especially if someone is just posting invoices onto Twitter or something, and it's just completely doxing all of that information to the open world. So I think there is some a lot of privacy gains that we can get on Lightning. I think it comes down to the users not shooting themselves in the foot and having a little bit more education on what to do and what not to do especially when it comes to receiving on Lightning.
We're sort of multifaceted though, application developers, they need to give users the tools to be able to not shoot themselves in the foot, but we also need to see some changes at a protocol level, I believe, to really get to where we want to be.
I think so one thing maybe that's kind of interesting to ask about Lightning privacy too is it's more private than being on chain, right? When you sit down and you look at it, transacting on Lightning is a step change function in how private your actual transactions are. So just when you're making transactions, if you're gonna make a transaction with Bitcoin, I think it's true that it's more private if you're doing it on Lightning. So if you had to pick on-chain versus Lightning and you're concerned about privacy, that's definitely the right choice, right?
Oh yeah, definitely.
Okay.
Especially if you're sending, receiving.
Well, I mean, it's definitely more private, but just it's not quite the perfect solution, that it kind of gets generalized about. But speaking of solutions to receiver-side privacy, there's a number of protocol proposals, rendezvous routing, route blinding, trampoline routing that could potentially level that to the point where receivers are at least more private than they are now, if not on par with senders. You guys have any favorites there in terms of which one to go with?
Yeah, from the protocol level, I haven't read a lot of the specs, but I think in general, just speaking at a high level, the ability to give out receivers need to give out some information to get paid. Ideally, that information doesn't reveal anything about them, so it could have a lot of maybe fake hops. Maybe it's with rendezvous or route blinding, and it's get your payment to this location, and then that location will get the payment to me. Kind of the gist of that. So it kind of cuts that separation. We're okay, everything previously we don't know where it came from, and then everything after we don't know where it's going either. So I think there's a lot of protocol advancements that could happen, especially for receivers. But I'd be curious if you looked at where we are at with being able to implement some of that on the protocol level?
Yeah, so there's a couple different proposals. So what we're kind of talking about is like when you send a payment right now, usually if you want to receive a payment on Lightning, you create something called an invoice, you give it to someone. Invoice has a bunch of information in it, right? So it tells you who you're paying, how much you're paying. Usually there's a description of what you're buying, et cetera. So invoices themselves leak basically all of your transaction data. Like that's the whole payment. That's the whole transaction is in the invoice, right? So, so there's some questions about like, okay, maybe we can, is there a way we can produce an invoice that doesn't tell you exactly which node on the network you're paying, but can pay to some intermediate node, and then that intermediate node will be able to figure out how to get to the person who actually wants to receive the payment. So this is almost like, I guess we call those like proxies in like normal networking stuff, right? Like,
yeah, and it's interesting because a lot of the proposals, it's not really just, making the data go away. It's like deferring to which parties are privy to who the receiver is. So, privacy is not just about like flicking a switch on or off. It's about selectively deciding who you want to know that information.
Yeah, and I mean, when it comes to like the three proposals we're discussing, like rendezvous routing, route blinding, trampoline routing, it's really, they're all kind of in a way like doing the same thing, just like little subtle differences. Like Evan or Lisa, I mean, do you guys have any kind of thoughts in terms of the privacy trade-offs between the three of them? Like the benefits you can get out of rendezvous versus route blinding versus trampoline, and potential negative sides to that, depending on which one gets implemented?
Yeah, so like I'm gonna be honest, I'm not as familiar with all the differences between like all three of them. I know that like, as far as like, so all of these are like ways that you basically can find another node to like, finish the payment for you to the actual destination. In terms of like what's being worked on currently, I know that the route blinding thing is currently implemented in Core Lightning, which is a project I work on, and there's a few other teams that are working on route blinding currently. So in terms of like out of these three things, which is the most likely to get over the line first in terms of like being accessible to the most people who are running Lightning, it'll definitely be route blinding. I was just talking to one of the maintainers of the async project. They're working on the route blinding stuff. I can't remember. I think trampoline routing is the one that we're supposed to be doing this year also for them and stuff. So maybe that'll be there soon. But these things are like actively proposed, like they're currently in progress. And I've been tasked with asking if you're a developer and you want to like get involved in improving some of the payment routing privacy on Lightning, we could definitely use some help reviewing the route blinding PR, which I think is number 765 on the Bolts repository. That's cool.
Evan, any thoughts on which path we should take here?
Yeah, route blinding is exciting because we have, I would say, the most tangible stuff. But really, I don't think we're going to really get like a full understanding of what all the implications and limits are really until we're testing it out in the wild. So I'm very excited to see that tooling out in various node projects out in the wild, and people just trying it and figuring out where they get caught up and whatnot. So wherever I can, either three of these methods, I would love to get them in Zeus so people can try them on the go and just give it a shot. And since all these methods are really just about like changing up how the routing goes, like instead of just having the sender figuring out the path to it, it's going to be interesting to see if people also have any pains with unable to being able to find like a path to make their payment. So that's the trade-off with a lot of these proposals. It's like you're going to be able to get selective privacy in a lot of ways, but it may make for a worse UX in terms of actually completing that payment.
Anthony, which one should we go with? What's the
Yeah, I
perfect
don't even think
solution?
it's like mutually exclusive either. Like I think we've we've had I think the Electrum Lightning implementation was like kind of the first to implement trampoline routing, which was kind of cool. I don't know anyone using that Python node. I don't know if you should, but it's like awesome to be able to like innovate and like all of us like independently in all the different node implementations, kind of like experimenting with different things and contributing or hopefully contributing back to the specification process, so we can kind of all benefit from it. So, and I think Async has also like implemented trampoline routing themselves. So, I think there's like combinations of things that we could all use to kind of, maybe it's possible to use trampoline routing with route blinding in a way, or vice versa. So, I would really just like to have like the most amount of like privacy options for users on Lightning. But like again, I do agree with everyone here that probably route blinding. I haven't looked at it deeply enough to like see any like connotations with it. So like I think in general, I think it's pretty well supported as far as like we should probably do route blinding.
Yeah, it's really just the nitty gritty, getting into the details and finishing the spec off and more experimentation. Yeah.
Well, all right. I've been trying to keep my mouth sipped a little more than my panel the first day, but just trampoline routing. I kind of have an issue at a high level with just like the idea of outsourcing the route construction to a third party, because in theory, you can just kind of nest different trampoline nodes together and then have like the first one, just get the route from you and then go on to the next one and the next one. And like any onion routed system, you don't know like if this is the final destination I'm routing to or another trampoline node. But in practice, a node doing trampoline routing and route selection is probably going to be very publicly visible and known.
Oh yeah.
And you still have information like the time step for the refund path in an HTLC to look at with a maximum length that can have. And like all the little metadata that kind of piles up where it's like, well, in theory, like you can just link the different trampoline nodes together and they don't know like what the final destination is. But in practice, there's probably going to be some things you can suss out, like the length of the route. Obviously, if let's say Blockstream had a trampoline node and I go there first, but then route to Async's, well, like Blockstream's node is going to see, oh, that's Async's node. Like that's just another trampoline hop. So, I mean, is maybe pitching that as a privacy solution kind of a misnomer? Is that not more of just a scaling solution for light wallets?
Yeah, I think that might. So I haven't looked at it closely. I would probably need to go back, but I think that intuition is probably pretty good. So basically the idea with the trampoline route is that you can, if you're using a trampoline route, you don't have to understand how to get to every node on the network. So it saves you a lot of data as a node, because you can offload the path routing, the path finding like responsibility to someone else on the network. I think it's for a fee. I think you get paid if you do I think there's some little earn some money by doing a trampoline route thing in there. So you get an extra fee for constructing a route for someone, or partial route, I should say. So then the idea is that if you have a mobile phone and a wallet and you wanted to send a payment from there, you only need to know how to construct a route to get to a trampoline node, and then you can get your payment sent from there. And then the trampoline node will figure out how to send it to anyone else on the network. Yeah, I don't know. So I think all of these things, these are routing level stuff, right? And so I think it's kind of interesting to talk okay, what sort of data are you leaking in when you're routing a payment, right? So we talked a little bit earlier, when you have an invoice is basically the part of figuring out who to pay and how much to pay them and for what, right? So it's invoice level. And then there's okay, once you have the invoice, you use the invoice to figure out the route you're going to take with your payment. And then once you've figured out this whole route finding thing, right? Maybe you're using Trampoline and someone else is finding out the route for you. What data is in a route, this route finding thing? It's going to be the amount of money that you're sending. It's gonna, oh, great, thank you. It's gonna be the amount of money that you're sending, right? So someone will know like how much money you're sending, and depending on where they are in your route, maybe who you're sending it to. Hello? Okay, I think it's still on. Great. So yeah, so there's kind of like that, like the level of information that you got kind of is different, sort of depending on where in the payment process, et cetera, that you find yourselves, right? One thing that's kind of interesting is talking to Matt Corallo, who works on Spiral. They do LDK stuff right before this. Is one of the current kind of issues with these payments. So when you send a payment across the network, usually they're wrapped up in things called onions, right? And so you do onion routing, which means that when you get a payment, you can see who sent it to you, and you can see where it's headed. But you, as a person in the middle of this route, have no idea where it came from before it got to you and where it's going after the next hop, right? So we already have that level of privacy in Lightning that already exists.
Yep.
We're talking about sort of different levels of ways that you can make those onions, and how do you make sure that maybe you don't know exactly who the last person is when you're constructing the onion. That's what blinded paths do. That's what Trampoline does in some sense, I think. Yeah, anyway, so one of the things with this routing data then is you want to be able to hide how far you've gone from the start point and how far you are from the finish. But there's there's kind of a tension here between that and this other parameter that we send in these packets called the CTLV lock, right? Lock time. So that you can kind of use, I think you can do, I think there are researchers that have done basically analysis on the CLTV lock. It kind of tells you how far you are in that path. So if someone knows how many hops away you are, they can kind of look back and maybe figure out where you came from and where it's going, et cetera. So that's kind of okay, how do you, those kinds of questions are okay, how do you de-anonymize or figure out where a payment's going given that you didn't see the invoice, et cetera. If you have the invoice, like I said, you usually know exactly where it's going. We're trying to fix this with the Bolt 12 stuff. Bolt 12s use blinded paths, so you'll be able to, as a receiver, not tell people that you're the node being paid. You can instead provide a little bit of a route of how to get to you, and so you send that with the request to be paid. The person who gets the request to be paid will pay to the beginning of this path that you've constructed, so they don't see where it goes after it gets to that start point, basically. But that's all payment level stuff. Sorry.
Yeah, and then along the same lines, with analyzing the time lock, you can even analyze the timing too. So if a payment normally takes a certain amount per hop, and you can even analyze how long each hops have certain network latency. You can even try to attempt to figure out where in the network a node may have been sending from. There's been some research on that level, but on the flip side, there's been a lot of research, or at least one paper, into how we can actually construct routes at the sender level to kind of take paths that are not the traditional path. That way, if I'm always going through a couple of different nodes, maybe they can analyze that, oh, well, it's probably coming from this location over here. They may not know exactly who's making the payment, but they can kind of make some educated guesses. But what's cool is that you can actually construct the, you construct the payment yourself, and maybe that kind of goes along the lines of maybe we shouldn't just hand it off to Trampolines to construct the routes ourselves. But if individuals are able to do these non-traditional, routing algorithms, pathing algorithms, then we can actually try to attempt to get better privacy and better heuristics there.
And so I think Core Lightning by default will choose a more random path than just the cheapest or most direct route. I think we use a fee budget, so we give you a budget to try and get to there, and so that way trying to kind of use not necessarily the most obvious way to make your payment happen, which is cool.
Well, I mean, that's just a massive issue that I think is really, are we going to be able to solve that one? Because what that really boils down to is timing analysis. And I mean, if you zoom out and say the NSA gets really interested in what's happening on the Lightning Network, well, they can just watch everybody's nodes and, oh, that string of packets, that's exactly the size that proposing an HTLC message is. Oh, and then something zipped back the other way? Oh, okay, did did that confirm or refund? And just watch the packets and go, well, the whole protocol is spec'd out. Like you know exactly like what the size of adding an HTLC is, removing it, like a pre-image flowing back through the route. And okay, like oopsies. Like
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, it's a major problem. So, a nation-state actor with that God-level view of the network and ascertain like some serious information. And there's been some ideas as to how to throw some extra noise into the network to sort of obfuscate what's actually happening. But that all comes with additional cost, right? It's already tricky to run a node, it's processing a lot of packets, if you're moving a lot of sats around too, especially. And we need to acknowledge that, with these ideas that are being proposed, it's going to increase the cost of node operation.
Mm-hmm. And well, I guess, not to put you on the spot, Anthony, but I hear you have a little project going on in regards to testing the privacy and effect of unannounced channels.
Yeah. So about a year ago, I wrote a paper on Lightning privacy, and as I was, just documenting what I knew about it, I learned quite a lot doing that. And one of the things is like we call private channels private, but they're really not. They're more along the lines of unannounced channels. So whenever I'm a node and I have, let's say I have all private channels, if I want to receive down them, I create an invoice and I give that invoice to other people to pay me. I basically have to like dox my unannounced channel. So with that unannounced channel, they can see the UTXO, the unspent transaction output that went into that channel. And then from there, you kind of have the leakage of all the things from that can be leaked on Bitcoin privacy, like on chain. Some of that follows and kind of flows into the Lightning Network as an inherent problem for privacy as well. So one of the things you can actually do is probing on the Lightning Network is actually I consider it kind of a big problem in the space. I don't like that probing happens. I don't like that it kind of is allows that, but probing is basically sending a whole bunch of fake information and finding information that is not like traditionally public. So it could be balances. In my case, what I'm trying to do right now, and I did a hackathon with Paul Miller in Austin a few weeks ago, where we're kind of proving this out with the LDK toolkit. You can actually probe for private channels to see if they exist between two nodes. If me and Evan here have a private channel, sorry, I keep saying
tell
private.
them about that.
Yeah. If we have an unannounced channel together and say it's like for like 10 Bitcoin because we're really rich people, so let's say it's like for a huge amount. It's all on his side. He opened up the channel. I'm doxing you, bro.
This is so bad.
You can actually, if I'm connected to the general Lightning graph, you can actually try to probe through my channel and like try to attempt to guess the UTXO that is between us. And if you're able to guess the UTXO between us, there's a different error message that it gets like sent backwards. So you kind of get into a situation where like once it proves it out, once you actually probe all the way through, like you create this fake payment in a way where like Evan basically has to come back. His node will come back and say, give it an error message like, I can't redeem this fake payment that you made. So, but the fact that he is the one that gave that error message, like proves out that there is this unannounced channel between us, and from there the amount, the UTXO, the addresses it's associated with, and like all of that is like possible today. And me and Paul finally like took the time to actually like create a proof of concept of doing that, and I'm hoping to run that over the next couple of months and release what my findings there, because it's like we can we love Lightning, right? I think a lot of us here really love some of this stuff, and it's like if this is possible, I want it to be like revealed. Like if I can do this, multi-billion-dollar firms can do this, triple letter agencies can do this. So I would rather us do this and find this information out and try to make the Lightning Network better.
Yeah, I mean, there's no security in this security theater. But yeah, I mean, yeah, if it breaks, let's break it now while things can still be fixed instead of 5 years from now when who knows how many countries are trying to plug into Lightning and use that as payment rails.
Yeah,
But
that's true.
kind of a related but little hard shift here. Who wants to talk about the gossip protocol and routing tables and figure out why we still explicitly dox the UTXO associated with a public channel so that the whole world can just follow where those coins go after channels close?
So this is like, so I would call this like a different level of privacy, right? So what we've been talking about beforehand is like payment level privacy. Like I want to make a transaction on Lightning. And so we've been talking about some of the like pros and cons of sending invoices to people and then sending payments, et cetera. This is kind of, so this level of privacy that we're talking about is like the gossip network, and UTXO level is more like what kind of, so the information that you are leaking or finding out, the privacy here is which UTXOs or like outputs in Bitcoin belong to which nodes, right? So it's tying on-chain outputs and balances to like, so basically the account balance of any one Lightning node. How easy is that to figure out? What kind of implications does that have? So I think it's kind of interesting actually that like this information is like completely separated to a large extent from your transaction data, right? So that's a big contrast from transacting online on-chain. When you make payments using on-chain Bitcoin, that becomes public record for everyone. Whereas when you're transacting on Lightning, it's ephemeral. People kind of have to be watching for your stuff to go through, or like constantly monitoring balances, et cetera, to even see the payments moving, et cetera. Anyways, this like gossip stuff. The way that Lightning works is these are for announced or public channels, right? Unannounced channels kind of escape this. When you make a Lightning channel, you're creating an on-chain transaction that creates a UTXO output. That UTXO output contains the balance of the channel. So there's two parties in a Lightning channel. Who owns what amount of that total balance is like kind of an open question. That's what you might use the probing stuff that we were talking about earlier to figure out. But the on-chain transaction, like typically, if you're using the version 1 of like channel opens, usually that balance is all on one side to start with, generically speaking. Anyways, okay, so you have these UTXOs. It would be all great and good if you didn't have to tell it. You could open a channel and you don't tell anyone that you made a UTXO on the main chain. That's what an unannounced channel is. But it makes it really hard for people to use that channel to do routes for payments if you don't tell them about it. So if you were trying to start up a Lightning node and earn money routing payment traffic from your node to someone else's, you would need to publicly announce them. The way that you publicly announce them is via something called the gossip network. Or is it gossip network? Do we call it the gossip network?
Well, we don't want to conflate people with it being with Lightning Network, but yeah, it's definitely a distinct part of the system for sure.
Yeah, so there's this like gossip thing where basically you make a message and you say, hey, this is me, this is my channel buddy, here's our pub keys that we put into this like on-chain transaction somewhere, here's where you can find it on-chain. Go verify it before you use this as a route. So this is what we're talking about routing table. The routing table is basically a list of all of these on-chain transactions and the current balance, like the total balance of the channel, right? And who is party to that, right? So if you have all these balances and all these like node connections, you can build like a connected graph with like balances. And then if you want to send a payment, you can look at this graph of data and figure out how to get from like Tony's node to that guy's node, and like, you know, go through the graph that way. But the downside to that is that you're telling people where your on-chain transactions are and you're associating them with your node ID. And this is public data that everyone running a Lightning node is hopefully getting. So if you're an organization like Chainalysis or some other such organization that has a large body of output data like on-chain data, and they've been working really hard to tie identities to those on-chain payments. Now if they already know kind of what some of your transaction history had been, and then you tie it, you put it on a Lightning node, and then you use that to open a channel, all of a sudden someone who's like managed to figure out your identity in another arena now knows which Lightning node is yours and which channel, like what your balances are in the network. So that's like a little kind of, I think, farther out. Anyway, so gossip is like really bad for on-chain privacy, especially if you're trying to route.
Yeah, and Rusty, your coworker, actually has a new proposal to kind of fix that, where instead of explicitly doxing the channel UTXO and associating it to a specific channel, a node can just take one UTXO and prove, like, I'm a node, I have real Bitcoin, and then not have to specifically connect it to their channels, so that, you know, opening and closing, that's not leaked. They just have their one little bit of Bitcoin to prove, like, I actually have money to route, but I'm not going to tell you the UTXOs to my actual channels.
Yeah. And this so this is the kind of thing, so like that, I think Rusty's proposal is the sort of thing that we would also need to adopt before you get any privacy improvements for Taproot, right? Because, for those of you who aren't familiar with Taproot, it basically makes it such that a Lightning channel goes from having a very specific on-chain footprint to being like a single signature and looking like kind of any other like output on-chain. But without changing the way that our gossip and our route table building stuff works, it's going to be very difficult to stop publishing that information anyways. But so Rusty's proposal though, then like the other consequence of this is you use gossip. The reason you do the gossip stuff, right, is so that you can build the route to send the payment. If we move away from publishing exactly how much money exists between two parties, how are you supposed to figure out where you can send payments or where there's like capacity to send your payments?
Yeah, route finding becomes very difficult.
Well, I think that like Rusty's proposal has a pretty elegant solution. Is just have like an amount for the UTXO you're tying to your node, and then some multiple of that is how much you're allowed to advertise in terms of like channels. It's like you have like 1 Bitcoin locked up, maybe you can advertise like 10 Bitcoin as channels.
That sounds like fractional reserve Lightning to me. I don't want that.
But I mean, seriously, I think that is an elegant solution, because the reality of why you dox these UTXOs in the first place is literally just to prove like you actually have control of Bitcoin, so that my wallet isn't spinning the wheel all day trying to route payments through people who don't actually have channels that, you know, there's no way to route a payment through. And I think that this would work. And you know, people concerned about denial of service or just like the multiple being way overblown, well, you know, just set it up as a curve. Like maybe you toss 0.1 Bitcoin on there, okay, maybe you can only advertise 0.2. But if you get up to throwing a whole Bitcoin on there, maybe, you know, 5. Like just adjust that curve to kind of prevent like being able to just pretend you have 1,000 Bitcoin when you just have 1.
So what tier you are in the federal banking system depends on like how much capital you have on chain.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like it'll trend towards centralization almost at that point, where we have major hubs and we're not really like, you know, locking up at the other layers. So I don't know. Yeah, it is a potential solution. I think like for so we're talking about like how to do this for like public channels, but I think there is like one thing to maybe you know, explain here is that there is some work right now on actually untying the unannounced channels from the UTXO right now. So there's a short channel ID aliases that is being worked on by a few different teams, I believe, where you can actually like, between me and my channel partner, we come up with this scheme where we make a fake alias for our channel ID that is not directly derived from the UTXO information. And then if we do that, then, you know, we are the ones that are aware of this. So I share, you know, an invoice with my routing hints in there. It gets to Evan, and then from there, Evan knows this like fake channel ID between us. So he just goes ahead and sends it to me, and then from there it becomes exponentially harder, or like almost impossible to guess that short channel ID. And even if you guessed the fact that me and Evan had a channel together, you wouldn't necessarily, or you wouldn't even be able to get the UTXO amount or the other information associated with UTXO. So I think there's some great privacy improvements for short channel alias IDs that I'm excited about.
But I mean, like the public channel still needs to be addressed. Like, one of the, I think, key points in that massive privacy article you wrote is if you have a private channel, well, you're receiving money through it. So whoever you open that channel with probably has a bunch of public channels, and eventually that's going to close. So if that private channel closes and they still have a balance on their side and that winds up later in a public channel, you can very easily deduce, okay, that last transaction was a private channel closing, and now your UTXO with that balance can be followed on chain. It's okay, this is probably involved in Lightning.
Yeah, exactly. And then on that note, if there is, it even works both ways. If that private channel, it gets closed and there's some on one end, some on the other, and they both open a public channel with other nodes, you even can tell the exact channel between the two nodes that there was probably a private channel between. There's all kinds of on-chain analytics, and that's one of the things I want to eventually do with this project I'm working on right now, where I actually try to analyze all the possible UTXOs that may be associated with a node and start at that point instead of just brute forcing through every pay-to-public script hash on the network. So there's a lot of weird on-chain analytics that you can kind of link back to a specific node, and that's one of them.
Will Taproot help with that?
I think Taproot. I think there will still be that UTXO that could end up in public channels, and then if Taproot can't help with the public channel aspect of it, then that's still a vulnerability. I think one of the things I'm excited about with Taproot and privacy that I think we can start slowly incrementing towards is the ability to right now I can look at all the pay to public script hash. Am I saying that correct? I always screw up the initials there.
Well, it's probably
pay to witness script hash. Yeah, I can look at all the pay to witness script hashes and try to use that as my baseline for brute forcing all these unannounced channels. But if everyone starts moving towards Taproot and everything looks like a normal spend, even channel openings and cooperative channel closings, then it makes it a lot harder to. It's a bigger set that I have to brute force, or anyone has to brute force, if we start in general, and if the Bitcoin space starts adopting Taproot even more.
Yeah, it's going to be a great step in the right direction to get Taproot channels. I feel like we'll get them this year. Obviously, it doesn't solve everything, but it's a nice foundation to work off of for sure.
Yeah. Any wild card topics in the last 2 minutes?
I just want to make kind of a public service announcement that if you are paying an invoice with Lightning and you're using a centralized service that's not your node, you are leaking your payment data. So none of the stuff that we talked about timing analysis or looking at payment traffic flow or probing is going to matter, because you've just told someone who you're paying and how much and why. So one thing, this is why we're really excited on Core Lightning about Bolt 12, is that it makes it possible to hide a lot of that information and still have someone else make a payment on your behalf.
That is actually a really good point. When you're using the Lightning Network yourself, your own node, your own channels, there's that asymmetry where the sender is extremely private. That whole dynamic is very private and receiving is not. And when you're dealing with a custodial wallet, it's almost the inverse. You're leaking everything about who you're paying to that custodian, but when you hand out an invoice, all anybody can tell is they're using this wallet.
Yeah, and to even further expand on that, like I could have my own node, not using any custodial services or anything, and if I like put in my invoice like this is for drugs, and I give that to a Strike user, Strike can associate my public key with drugs, and that could put me on a blacklist of some extent. So like even if I give an invoice, I don't know how they're going to pay me. So like they may pay with their node or they pay with Strike, but if they paid with Strike or another custodian, then now they link me to drugs, and that's no bueno.
So yeah, I guess last note, don't use custodial wallets that take your personal identifying information and buy drugs on the internet. But we're out of time. So thanks everybody for doing this. This was a blast.
Cheers.